They didn't even wait for the lawyer to speak. She's not getting anything. Grandma made that clear. That was the first thing my cousin Leah said when I stepped through the doorway of the estate library, loud enough for every pair of pearl-draped ears to hear it. No greeting. No glance. Just a sentence sharp enough to slice skin. She wanted it to echo, and it did. I felt it land in my chest like a cold stone. My grip on Maisie's hand tightened. Her fingers, smaller than my own, curled around mine just a little tighter, warm and shaking. She didn't ask what Leah meant. She didn't need to. She always knew. I hadn't even taken a step farther into the room. But the message was clear. I wasn't welcome. I wasn't family. I was an old wound they were hoping would stay shut. They were here to claim. And I was just the shadow that showed up to ruin the picture. Leah stood near the fireplace, draped in a designer black jumpsuit, her golden curls perfectly pinned. She wore mourning like an accessory, something curated. Her mother, Aunt Vivian, was perched like royalty at the head of the polished oak table. Her silk blouse was white, crisp, expensive, and untouchable like her. Then came the laugh. Dry. Arrogant. My Uncle Malcolm. He leaned back in his chair, the legs creaking slightly beneath his weight. Look at her, he said. More to the room than to me. Shows up after all these years with a kid and no shame. His eyes landed on Maisie, and something in me snapped silent. Maisie looked down. I felt her shrink next to me. My heart cracked in places that were already barely patched together. Around the table I saw the faces of people I hadn't seen in over a decade. Cousins, old neighbors. Eleanor's bridge friends, each face carefully painted with polite interest. But their eyes said it all. We've already decided who belongs here. It isn't you. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like ash. The air in the room was thick with stale cigar smoke and lavender perfume, Grandma's favorite. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. It felt like walking into a museum built from memories I didn't get to keep. I led Maisie to the last chair at the very end of the table, furthest from Aunt Vivian. The chair creaked when I sat. Maisie climbed up beside me, her legs swinging nervously beneath her skirt. She kept her hands in her lap, trying to make herself smaller, quieter. Crossed the room. Aunt Vivian tilted her head and gave me a smile. But it wasn't kindness. It was a smile soaked in arsenic. You do understand this is a formality, she said, tone smooth as cold marble. Eleanor made her wishes very clear. You chose your path, Danica. You chose to disappear. I didn't reply. My tongue felt useless, heavy with everything I could have said but had already said too many times before. I just nodded slightly. It was all I could do. But inside, I was burning. Not with rage but with grief. Grief for the grandmother who once taught me how to ride a bike in this very backyard. Grief for the child version of me who thought blood meant loyalty. Grief for the fact that I had let myself believe maybe there would be something. A note. A mention. A sentence in her handwriting that said, I didn't forget you. Instead, I sat at the edge of the same family that had long ago written me out of the story. And still I came. Not for them, but for Maisie. Because no matter how unwanted I felt, she deserved to know where she came from. She deserved to see it for herself. And just when I thought it couldn't get any colder, the door opened again. Mr. Edmonds entered, Eleanor's attorney, dressed in charcoal gray with a thin black folder tucked beneath his arm. The room fell into a hush. He didn't smile. He never did. And just like that, the reading of Eleanor Morgan's will began. I hadn't set foot in this house in over 10 years. Not since the night I stood on this very porch, holding a duffel bag in one hand and Maisie's diaper bag in the other, only to be told by Aunt Vivian that now's not a good time. She'd looked at me like I was a ghost, something inconvenient and already dead. And then she'd shut the door. I stood there in the rain for 10 minutes before I turned around and walked away. I didn't even knock twice. That's what it had become. Family was a door I wasn't allowed to reopen. They said I abandoned them. Said I walked away because I was too sensitive, too stubborn, too dramatic. But they never mentioned why I left. No one asked what it felt like to be publicly shamed when I published an exposé on a local developer who'd been funneling funds, someone whose last name just happened to be married into our family. No one cared that Grandma Eleanor stopped returning my calls the moment the press got involved. And when I lost my job, my apartment, my reputation, they all stood in silence. They didn't say I was wrong. They just said I embarrassed them. I tried to keep a thread between us. I sent letters. holiday cards, photos of Maisie when she turned 2. All unanswered. At some point, you stop writing to a locked mailbox. You stop hoping the door will open again. You learn to build something else. Something quieter, more honest. That's what Maisie and I had. We didn't have wealth or status or inheritance, but we had each other. And for a long time that was enough. Until 3 weeks ago, when a pale envelope arrived with no return address, just a date, time, and the words. Well, reading of Eleanor Morgan. Attendance requested. Signed in perfect looping cursive by Mr. Edmonds himself. For days I couldn't decide whether to go. What was the point? I knew what they thought of me. Vivian had probably choreographed the whole thing like a stage play. But Maisie had looked up at me with her soft brown eyes and asked, "What if there's something you need to hear, Mom?" That's the thing about children. Sometimes they don't ask the right questions. Sometimes they ask the real ones. So I came. Not for inheritance. Not for forgiveness. Just for closure. But as I sat there at the far end of the table, every eye in the room trained to avoid mine, I realized closure wasn't something they would give. It was something I'd have to take in silence and composure and unshakable stillness. Maisie's fingers slipped into mine again under the table. She hadn't said a word since we entered. She didn't need to. She knew how to read a room. She always had. Unlike the others who sniffed around for assets like vultures and pearls, Maisie was still observant, aware. She wasn't here for jewelry or shares or properties. She was here for me. I glanced sideways at her and saw her eyes flick across the table, cataloging every face, every fidget, every smirk. She wasn't scared. She was waiting. For what? I didn't know. Across the table, Vivian whispered something to Leah and they both smiled like hyenas sharing a kill. Leah tapped her manicured nails on the table's edge, a rhythmic click-clack that made my jaw clench. Vivian sipped from a crystal glass with all the elegance of someone preparing to gloat. I wondered if they were rehearsing lines. How to deliver their triumph when my name wasn't mentioned. How to mask their glee with just enough faux sympathy to look civilized. But they didn't know me anymore. They hadn't earned the right. And even if this whole thing ended with me walking out empty-handed and unseen, I had one thing they didn't. Maisie. And the quiet strength of a child who knew how to love without conditions. Across the room, Mr. Edmonds cleared his throat. The reading was about to begin. The wolves were circling. But for the first time in years. I wasn't afraid. Mr. Edmonds adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and opened the black leather folder with the kind of gravity that made the whole room shift ever so slightly forward in their seats. The room fell still. Even Leah stopped tapping her nails. The only sound left was the faint hum of the antique ceiling fan and the high-pitched ringing in my own ears. "This is the last will and testament of Eleanor M. Morgan," Edmonds began. His voice steady, clinical, detached from the human consequences. "As notarized and updated on March 17th of this year. I will proceed in order of beneficiaries." I didn't expect my name to come early. Hell, I didn't expect it to come at all. But I wasn't prepared for the way each sentence felt like a knife being drawn, slowly, just above the skin. "To my daughter Vivian Morgan," Edmonds read. "I leave the Savannah estate and all associated land titles to be divided at her discretion." Vivian didn't react. She didn't need to. The slight lift of her chin was enough. She already knew. "To my granddaughter Leah Carter, I leave the Morgan jewelry collection, including the sapphire necklace worn on my wedding day, and the trust account established at Bank of Savannah." Leah pressed her lips together like she was trying not to smile too widely. She failed. Neil, her husband, reached under the table and squeezed her hand like they'd just won the lottery. "To my nephew Tyler Morgan, I leave the 1965 Thunderbird and the accompanying vehicle collection stored in the Oak Ridge garage." Tyler let out a breathy nice. Like he was choosing his next Instagram post. I sat silent, still slowly shrinking behind the invisible wall they had all worked so hard to build. Maisie leaned her shoulder against mine. I could feel her watching me, like she knew something I didn't. But I couldn't look at her. Not yet. Then came the words I had been waiting for. And dreading. And as previously declared, Edmund said, his voice slightly tighter now, "Danica Morgan is to receive no portion of the estate. This decision was made with full mental capacity and is to remain uncontested." Boom. There it was. A clean cut. No explanations. No apologies. Just legal steel through my chest. Vivian let out a quiet breath. a sound dangerously close to a victorious sigh. Leah turned her eyes to me, briefly triumphantly. Uncle Malcolm snorted. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Not even when I felt the tears sting behind my eyes. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But inside I was cracking. Not because of the money or the house or the will. Because even in death, Grandma had signed off on the lie. That I didn't matter. That I didn't belong. That I was wrong for choosing to walk away instead of swallowing the rot they all passed around like vintage wine. Mr. Edmonds flipped to the final page, preparing to close the folder. And I prepared to leave. I could feel myself already detaching, rehearsing how I'd gather Maisie's things, walk out that door, and never look back again. But then, a small voice broke through the silence. Clear. Steady. Unmistakable. You forgot the envelope Grandma gave me. Every head in the room turned. Maisie sat upright in her chair, her small hand already reaching into her backpack. Vivian blinked, her lips parting. Leah squinted. Even Mr. Edmonds paused mid-motion. I turned to Maisie, stunned. What? Envelope? I whispered. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were locked straight ahead on Mr. Edmonds. She told me to give it to you. If this happened, Maisie said calmly, placing a white envelope on the table. She said you'd know what to do. My heart stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Vivian leaned forward, voice tight. This is nonsense. She wouldn't give that to her. She barely even spoke to her. Mr. Edmonds gently picked up the envelope, his fingers hovering above the handwriting. He turned it over. Read it once. Then again. His eyes flicked up. She did, he said quietly. His voice held something I hadn't heard before. Something closer to reverence. The room tensed. Maisie leaned back into her seat. And for the first time since we walked in, she smiled just slightly. As if she knew. They had all prepared for a performance. But they'd forgotten the final act. The room was frozen. Not silent, frozen. Like the very air had turned solid. Thick with disbelief and something else, fear. Mr. Edmonds held the envelope like it might detonate. His eyes flicked across the handwriting again. Then back to Maisie. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice softer now. Not skeptical. Just careful. Maisie sat straight-backed in her chair. Hands folded in her lap. Grandma gave it to me the last time I saw her, she said. She said to keep it safe and only give it to you if things got mean. She made air quotes around the word. It would have been endearing if the moment weren't so loaded. I blinked at my daughter. Stunned. The last time she saw Eleanor? That must have been the weekend she'd stayed overnight at our neighbor's house, the one time I had a freelance deadline and couldn't take her with me. I had no idea she and Eleanor had seen each other. No one told me. Now Mr. Edmonds opened the envelope slowly, carefully pulling out its contents. One black USB drive. And a single note. Handwritten. Same unmistakable cursive, sharp and slanted, Eleanor Morgan's. He read it silently, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. Then for the first time in all the years I'd known him, his expression cracked. Just a flicker. But enough. Vivian noticed it too. She stood abruptly, her voice shrill and cracking at the edges. This is absurd. That letter could be a forgery. Eleanor never mentioned any A. It's verified, Mr. Edmonds said, cutting her off gently but firmly. The handwriting, the timestamp, the signature. And per her written instruction, if the contents of the original will lead to conflict or emotional distress within the family, I am legally required to present this. He paused. And play it. A ripple of disbelief ran across the room. Leah scoffed. Uncle Malcolm muttered something under his breath. But no one dared to move. What's even on it? Vivian demanded, voice thin. Mr. Edmonds raised his gaze. I don't know. But she sealed it herself. And as her attorney, I am bound to honor her request. He walked over to the built-in cabinet near the bookshelves and pulled out a slim black laptop. He plugged in the USB. No one said a word. The screen flickered. A soft ping. One file. Labeled. EM, final message. Mr. Edmonds glanced at me for a moment, then back at the screen. He clicked. The image cut to black. Then, there she was. Eleanor Morgan. Sitting in the sunroom I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. The pale light from the stained glass windows cast soft patterns across her navy cardigan. Her white hair was neatly combed. Her eyes, still sharp, still clear, looked directly into the camera. I stopped breathing. "Hello," she said softly. "If you're watching this." Then things went how I feared. She paused, folding her hands in her lap. I never intended for this to be necessary. But knowing my family, I suspected there might be trouble if I tried to change things. Vivian inhaled sharply. Eleanor continued. "I've made mistakes," she said, voice steady. "Some of them I didn't even realize until it was too late. But some I saw. I just didn't know how to fix." She looked down for a moment, then back at us. "I'm talking to you now, Danica." My heart slammed against my ribs. You deserved better. And so did Maisie. The air in the room thinned. I could feel the weight shifting slowly, like gravity recalibrating. Years ago, I believed what Vivian told me. I believed what others wanted me to believe. That you were difficult. That you left because you didn't care. She shook her head slowly. But that wasn't the truth, was it? She looked up. And if you're hearing this now, then I've said things right. The screen froze for a moment. And every person in that room knew. Whatever came next was going to change everything. The room had stopped breathing. All eyes were fixed on the screen as Eleanor, our grandmother, matriarch, myth, looked straight ahead like she could see into each of us. I gripped the edge of my chair, my knuckles white. "I was wrong," she said. Her voice cracked ever so slightly. "I was wrong about you, Danica." Vivian shifted violently beside the fireplace as if the words themselves had slapped her. Leah's jaw dropped. Uncle Malcolm leaned forward, finally interested in something that didn't involve bourbon or real estate. "I let other people's voices drown out your truth," Eleanor continued. "I believed lies because they were easier than asking hard questions. And because I didn't want to believe the people closest to me could be cruel." She looked down at something in her hands, a photo maybe. I couldn't see it. Her thumb rubbed the edge slowly. "I told myself you walked away. That you abandoned us. But I see now. I abandoned you long before you left." I could feel the burn in my chest. Rage, relief, heartbreak, blurring into something that had no name. Maisie's hand slipped back into mine. "I hurt you," Eleanor said, voice quieter now. "And I hurt your daughter by extension. That shame is mine to carry." She paused, swallowed. "And it's why I changed the will." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Vivian stood abruptly. She must have been coerced. "Sit," Mr. Edmonds said. Not loud, but final. The kind of voice that closes doors. Eleanor's image didn't flinch. "As of March 17th, she said, all previous versions of my will were nullified. The Savannah estate, my savings, investments, and the Eleanor Morgan Literary Trust, all of it, will go to Danica Morgan and her daughter, Maisie Morgan." I didn't hear the rest at first. I couldn't. The world had dropped out beneath me. All the weight I'd carried, all the years of being branded, the disappointment, the invisible one, the exile, it cracked open like a shell. And inside was something I hadn't dared hope for. Vindication. Not in money. In truth. Eleanor wasn't done. "I know this will anger some of you," she said, her gaze sharp as ice. "But let it. I've lived too long afraid of conflict. Too long covering for people who don't deserve protection." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know what you did," she said, almost like she was in the room with us. Vivian's face was beet red. Leah looked like she might cry. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "To those of you who believe inheritance is a reward for loyalty, ask yourself what kind of loyalty demands silence, shame, and the erasure of someone's voice." She shook her head. "Danica was never the one who failed this family. I was. And then." She smiled. Soft. Wistful. Real. "I met Maisie," she said, turning slightly toward the camera. "She came to visit me that Sunday. She brought me a cup of tea and told me her mom makes the best grilled cheese in the world." She chuckled. She didn't brag or cry or plead. She just sat with me. And when I asked her what her mother was like, she looked me dead in the eye and said. She glanced down at the paper in front of her. "My mom is the safest place in the world." My vision blurred. My chest cracked open. "She was right," Eleanor said, barely holding her voice together. "You are, Danica. And I'm so sorry it took me a lifetime to see it." She leaned forward, eyes glistening now. "I hope this gives you some peace. I hope you use it to build something beautiful. And I hope, one day, you can forgive me." There was a long pause. Then one last sentence. Simple. Pure. I love you. The screen faded to black. No music. No outro. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't the cold, bitter silence I'd lived with for so long. It was reverent. Heavy with truth. I sat still, hand over my mouth, tears trailing silently down my cheeks. No one moved. Not Leah. Not Malcolm. Not even Vivian, who had dropped her glass onto the carpet without even noticing. My daughter had known. Had felt it. Carried that envelope like it was nothing. When it held the power to set everything right. I turned to her, trembling. And Maisie, my quiet, observant, brave little girl, just smiled. The silence cracked. A single chair scraped against the polished wood floor, sharp, screeching, like a scream through porcelain. Vivian shot up from her seat. Her hands trembling as they slammed against the edge of the table. This is a trick, she hissed, voice raw, unraveling. She must have done something. This isn't. Eleanor was confused. She didn't understand. Enough. Mr. Edmonds didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. It cut through the air with surgical precision. The file is dated, time-stamped, verified. The will was updated with full legal oversight. And her capacity was confirmed by 2 independent professionals, your mother's request, I might add. Vivian's mouth opened. Then closed. Her fingers twitched. Desperate for control she no longer had. Leah stood too. But she promised me the jewelry collection. I even have the appraisal documents. She turned to her husband, eyes wide with disbelief. She wrote it down. Didn't she? Didn't she, Neil? Neil looked like he'd rather vanish into the carpet than answer. I stayed seated. My hands were folded in my lap. Maisie sat beside me, steady as ever. For once I didn't have to fight. Truth had done it for me. Uncle Malcolm shifted in his chair. He didn't stand. He didn't speak. But his jaw was tight, locked in a kind of quiet fury reserved for men who believed life owed them more. Vivian turned her rage on Mr. Edmonds. We'll contest this. You're free to try, he replied as calmly as before. But Eleanor anticipated that. There's a clause. He flipped the folder open again and slid a single page across the table. It states that any party who contests the final will forfeit their claim entirely, even to sentimental assets. Eleanor was very clear. Vivian's face went pale. Leah's lips parted in shock. You're lying. No, Mr. Edmonds replied. Your mother simply stopped allowing you to rewrite the ending. Vivian clenched her jaw so tight I could almost hear her teeth grinding. She turned to me then, and for the first time in years she didn't look superior. She looked afraid. This isn't what she wanted, she said quietly. You poisoned her. I stood finally. But I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply looked her in the eyes. She wasn't poisoned, Vivian, I said, voice calm. She was finally clear. Vivian stared at me. No words. Just years of bitterness swirling in her eyes. Then she turned and stormed out, heels echoing across the wooden floor like hammer strikes. Leah followed, slower, deflated. Neil didn't move until she barked his name. Uncle Malcolm was the last to rise. He gave me one long, unreadable look, then shook his head and muttered, should have seen it coming, before disappearing down the hallway. And then, we were alone. Just me, Maisie, and Mr. Edmonds. He gathered the documents slowly, methodically, as if giving me space to breathe. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. There will be some paperwork, he said, but everything is legally sound. You're the sole inheritor now, Danica. Everything is yours. I nodded. But my body hadn't caught up yet. I felt untethered, floating in the moment between fight and flight, only this time, there was nowhere to run. Only a future that, for once, belonged to me. Maisie stood and looped her arms around my waist. You okay, Mom? She asked. I nodded slowly, pressing my cheek to her head. I think I will be, I whispered. Because of you. She smiled. And for the first time since we stepped into that house, I let myself believe it. We had done it. Not with yelling. Not with revenge. But with quiet truth, carried by the smallest hands in the room. Mr. Edmonds lingered by the door as if he were waiting for a cue that never came. Instead, he turned back, reached into the folder once more, and pulled out a smaller envelope, cream-colored. Sealed with a wax stamp I hadn't seen in years. Eleanor's personal crest, the Morgan rose, pressed in burgundy. This was meant only for you, he said, extending it carefully. She wrote it by hand. No copies. I hesitated before taking it. Something about the weight of that envelope felt heavier than anything I'd held in years. Like it contained not just ink and paper, but the final fragments of a woman I had once called home. "Thank you," I whispered. Mr. Edmonds gave a faint nod and quietly stepped out of the room. Closing the door behind him, Maisie and I stood there alone, the air still humming with all that had been said, and all that hadn't. I sat back down in the same chair, the wood now warmer beneath me. No longer a throne of judgment but simply a place to land. Maisie crawled into the chair beside me, knees tucked to her chest, watching silently as I broke the seal. Inside, a single folded page. The edges slightly wrinkled. The ink faintly smudged in places like it had been written through trembling hands or the blur of tears. I opened it slowly. "My dearest Danica, if you're reading this, then my cowardice lasted longer than my time on Earth." I couldn't say these words aloud, not because they weren't true, but because I was afraid that saying them would unravel me. And I deserved to be unraveled for what I did to you. I failed you. I failed you when I believed others over you. When I valued appearances more than your pain. When I mistook silence for strength and distance for discipline. You stood in front of me, frightened, heartbroken, holding your baby, and I turned you away. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know how to admit I had raised a family that made love feel conditional. But Maisie. She opened a door I thought I'd locked for good. That day she came to see me without fanfare, without expectation. She sat in the chair across from me and asked me if I had ever been afraid to be forgotten. I wept when she said that. She didn't flinch. She said, "It's okay if you miss my mom. I do too, even when she's right next to me. Danica, that girl carries your light." And somehow, she helped me remember what yours looked like. You are the strongest person I've ever known. You stood in the storm again and again and never stopped loving. I can't undo what I erased. But I can leave behind the space for you to grow, thrive, and rest. Let this house be a home again. Let these resources lift you, not because you need them, but because you earned peace. Not with blood, with truth. And with that, I hope the echoes you've lived with for so long finally quiet. All my love. Eleanor. The letter slipped from my fingers into my lap. Maisie reached over and gently touched the paper, like even at 11 she knew this was sacred. I leaned back, staring at the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. For the first time in years. It didn't feel harsh. It felt like forgiveness. Like recognition. Like truth, finally echoing back. It took me 3 days to unlock the front door without shaking. Not because I didn't have the keys. Mr. Edmonds handed those over within hours of the will being executed. But because I needed to unlearn what this house had always been to me, a fortress of judgment. A place where silence meant punishment and presence was conditional. Now it was mine. Every inch of it. Maisie and I stood at the threshold as the late afternoon sun painted golden lines across the porch. The same porch where I'd once stood, soaked and pregnant, waiting for someone to open the door. Now I didn't have to knock. I turned the key. The lock clicked. And we stepped in. The scent hit me first. Not perfume or dust or memory, but citrus oil. Clean. New. The house had been clean for the transition. But I could still feel the ghost of Eleanor somewhere in the wallpaper, the creak of the stairs, the piano bench that never fully closed. Maisie wandered ahead, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She stopped in the sunroom. "This was it," she said softly, tracing the edge of a high-backed chair. "This is where she made the video." I nodded, stepping beside her. The stained glass still threw streaks of red and blue across the floorboards. It looked less haunted now. More human. Maisie turned and looked up at me. "Do we live here now?" Her voice was small. Hopeful. Careful. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "We do," I said. "If you want to." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the corner of the room, sat cross-legged in a pool of colored light, and whispered, "I think she meant for us to." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and nodded. That evening, we ate dinner on the kitchen floor, takeout, chopsticks, paper napkins, and laughed as Maisie told me how she wanted to repaint the guest bedroom. Something warm like peach or terracotta. Not all those stiff old lady blues. I told her she could choose every color. Every room. This was our house now. Ours to rebuild. To reclaim. Not just with paint or furniture but with joy. Later. As she dozed off on the living room couch, curled beneath a quilt Eleanor had once sewn decades ago, I walked through the rooms alone. The silence was different now. Not oppressive. Not suffocating. Peaceful. Full. Every step I took echoed, not with judgment, but with possibility. I stopped at Eleanor's old study and pushed open the door. The shelves still held every journal I used to sneak glances at as a girl. I reached for one, The Year of the Garden, and pulled it gently from the shelf. Inside, stuck between pages, was a photo. Me, at 15, sitting in the rose garden. Dirt on my knees. Smiling without trying. Eleanor had kept it. All these years. I held the photo to my chest, eyes closed, and let the ache rise. But it was different now. Not the ache of absence. The ache of return. Of belonging. Of forgiveness that had finally made it home. Have you ever been erased by the people who should have loved you the most? Or carried a truth no one believed, until it finally came to light? Tell us the moment that meant the most to you in Danica's story. If this journey stirred something inside you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories where justice, healing, and strength find their voice. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. And sometimes the truth arrives exactly when it's meant to.